Jack Taylor was 25 years old, single, and full of ambition. He had big plans for his life and the confidence to chase them. After a night out at a local club, Jack made a decision that may have changed everything. He arranged to meet a man he had just met online. Within just 36 hours, Jack Taylor was found dead. We knew something terrible had happened, but we didn't know where to begin. Jack had been murdered by Stephen Port. Are you telling us the truth, Stephen? I'm telling you the truth. But he was lying. He had already taken the lives of 4 men. Victims were turning up dead, one after another. He was a predator, a manipulative, calculated predator, and in the end, it cost 4 young men their lives. As detectives slowly pieced the puzzle together, a picture of the killer began to emerge. Which clue would finally expose Stephen Port? I don't even like saying his name, someone close to the victim says. He destroyed our lives. He took Jack from us. Stephen Port spent hours in a police interrogation room. He denied everything, again and again. Even when confronted with the digital trail, online messages, drug searches, dating app records, he refused to admit what he had done. It took 18 months before he was officially arrested for not 1, but 4 murders. Did you give him drugs, Stephen? Number, I've never given drugs to anyone. But the evidence said otherwise. At first, detectives thought Jack Taylor had died from an accidental overdose. They didn't suspect murder. But Jack's sisters knew something wasn't right. They refused to believe it was just drugs. They kept pushing, asking questions, demanding answers. And in the end, they helped uncover the truth. Their determination forced investigators to take a second look. And what they found was far more disturbing than anyone imagined. Jack didn't use drugs. We were sure of that. But when we asked police about the syringe they found near him, they said it hadn't been used. So how could they say he gave himself an overdose? It just didn't add up. Jack was one of several young men whose bodies were found near an old churchyard in Barking, East London. Like the others, he had spent time inside Stephen Port's home, a place that would become known for death. Port didn't just use dating apps. He used them obsessively, and with fake profiles too. He planned his attacks. He switched platforms. He learned how to get away with it. On one site, he met a young Muslim man who had never drunk alcohol or touched drugs in his life. That man said Port gave him something to inhale, poppers, and he blacked out. When he woke up, Port handed him a drink he claimed was water, but it tasted strange. He said he felt paralyzed. His underwear had been removed, but he never went to the police. He was too scared to come out to his family. As terrifying as that night was, he survived. He may have been the last one to leave that apartment alive. Just 10 days later, Port paid £800 to hire an escort through a site called Sleepy Boys. The escort's name was Anthony Walgate, a 23-year-old fashion student from Hull. They arranged to meet on the night of June 17, 2014. Anthony never came back. Later, from prison, Port described what happened in disturbing letters to a former inmate. He wrote how they met, how he gave the victim drugs, and how the man had a funny turn, as Port coldly put it. 2 days later, on June 19th, Anthony Walgate's body was found sitting upright near the entrance of a flat complex, the very building where Stephen Port lived. Port had carried the body outside, left it there, and called emergency services, pretending he didn't know the man. Port wasn't treated like a suspect. He was allowed to walk free. And because of that, others would die. What if the police had listened more closely? What if they'd seen through the lies? Jack, Anthony, and the others might still be alive. At first, no one suspected foul play. It was ruled as a drug-induced overdose, tragic but not criminal. The caller? a man who claimed he had just stumbled upon the lifeless body. But within a week of making that 999 call, Stephen Port was arrested, not for murder, but for lying to the police. Authorities began looking deeper. Who was this young man? Why was he even near that apartment building in Barking? Phone records, along with logs from the Sleepy Boys escort site, led them to a chilling realization. Anthony Walgate had been booked by none other than Stephen Port himself, the same man who called in his death. The investigation, however, was limited because the death was framed as the unfortunate aftermath of consensual sex and drugs. The police didn't go looking for a killer. They went looking for a cause. Had they approached it as a homicide, evidence collection would have followed a completely different protocol. But with only a surface-level investigation, critical clues inside Port's apartment were overlooked, including files on his computer and disturbing search histories. Keywords like drug rape, chemsex, and passed-out boys were all over his devices. And if investigators had checked deeper, they might have discovered just how many men he'd contacted via Grindr, FitLads, and other platforms. His computer even held video footage, sinister recordings of unconscious victims being abused. But all of it remained hidden because no one bothered to look. While the authorities hesitated, Port was already preparing for his next move. His second victim, 22-year-old Gabriel Kovari, a Slovakian immigrant trying to find a new life in London. For a brief time, he even lived with Port, but felt increasingly unsafe. In text messages to a friend, Gabriel wrote, "Stephen's not a good man." And soon, Gabriel disappeared. On August 28th, just 70 days after Anthony's death, Gabriel was found dead. Once again, his body was posed. Once again, it was near St. Margaret's Church, just steps from Port's flat. And once again, police chalked it up, to a drug overdose. Sunglasses were placed on his face, his shirt pulled up to expose his abdomen. The glasses were kept by police, but never tested for DNA. Stephen Port had gambled and won. He believed he could keep getting away with it. And he was right. For now, the pattern was clear. The killer was getting bolder. Only 3 weeks after Gabriel Kovari's body was found, another young man turned up dead, in the same graveyard, in the same position. His name was Daniel Whitworth, just 21 years old. But this time, Stephen Port left something new, a suicide note, planted to shift blame away from himself and to imply a tragic confession. In the letter, Whitworth supposedly admitted to accidentally killing Gabriel by giving him drugs and then taking his own life out of guilt. It was a false confession, written by Port. Police believed it. They never cross-referenced Daniel's handwriting. They never told his family about the note. They accepted the scene at face value, closing the case without real investigation. Stephen Port's lies had now rewritten reality. But then, 14 months passed. 4 young men had now died. And still, no serial killer on police radar. That is, until the final murder. Jack Taylor, 25 years old, confident, kind, and deeply loved by his family. He was a security guard who'd never been in trouble. But one night, he vanished. Days later, his body was found, just like the others, near St. Margaret's Church. Once again, the signs were there. Same location, same positioning, same drugs. But police again assumed accidental overdose. Only Jack's sisters refused to believe that. They pushed. They questioned. They demanded answers. And this time, someone listened. Stephen Port was now 39, a man with no previous criminal convictions. But now he had a method, a motive, and a sense of control he had never felt before. Luring young men to his apartment, under the promise of intimacy, he would drug them, until they could no longer fight back. In just 3 months, he had taken 2 lives. And he wasn't done. What started slow escalated quickly. Port, once rejected and invisible, now felt powerful. Maybe for the first time, this wasn't just about desire anymore. It was about domination. And yet, the police still didn't see it. The only thing Port was officially guilty of: lying during a 999 emergency call. Audio clip of Port faking the emergency call. Where was it? Outside. What's your number? I don't know. I just looked. 7 before. Yes. That lie should have raised red flags, but it didn't. And so Port remained free. Free to keep hunting. Free to kill again. By August 2014, 2 men, Anthony Walgate and Gabriel Cavari, had been found dead. Their bodies discovered within meters of each other and just yards from Port's flat. The scene was always the same: bodies partially undressed, positioned against a wall in a quiet graveyard. Drug overdose, police said. But questions were growing. Local journalist Ramzi Al-Wakil would later dig into these cases. He left them in public, in view, so he clearly wasn't too worried about being caught. It was like he was saying, next. When police questioned him, Port denied involvement. Did you have anything to do with the death of Gabriel Cavari or Gabriel Klein? Number Y did not. But the pattern was undeniable. 3 young men, all gay, all meeting men online, had died in nearly identical ways. Still, authorities reassured the public there was no cause for concern until the 3rd body appeared. On September 18th, 2014, just 1 month after Gabriel's death, Daniel Whitworth was found dead in the exact same spot. Same graveyard, same position, same signs of drugging. But this time, there was something new. A note, a suicide letter, allegedly written by Daniel himself, found folded in his hand. But it wasn't a confession. It was a fabrication. And it was Stephen Port's most manipulative move yet. The deaths were no longer coincidences. 4 young men, all gay, all found within walking distance of each other, and all killed in the same sinister way. Still, it wasn't the police who connected the dots. It was the families, the friends, the community. Their voices grew louder, and silence was no longer an option. After Jack Taylor's death, the police could no longer ignore the alarming similarities. They reopened old case files. They re-examined toxicology reports. They began to map out a chilling timeline, one that pointed again and again to a single address in Barking, Stephen Port's flat. When detectives finally searched Port's home thoroughly, the horror they found went beyond what anyone had imagined. Hidden drives filled with videos of unconscious men, searches for drugging methods, messaging histories with dozens of young men. It was no longer about suspicion. It was proof. Cold, calculated, and damning. Stephen Port was arrested in October 2015, charged with 4 counts of murder, sexual assault, drugging, and perverting the course of justice. But more than a killer, he was now a symbol of how the system failed the victims, how lives were lost, not just to one man's evil, but to silence, prejudice, and missed warnings. In 2016, after a lengthy trial at the Old Bailey, Stephen Port was found guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with no possibility of parole. Justice delayed, but finally delivered. But for many, it came too late. This is not just a story about a killer. It's about how easily evil hides in plain sight, how silence protects it, and how it takes courage, ordinary, persistent courage, to bring truth to light. In late 2016, justice was formally served. At the Old Bailey, the 41-year-old Port was convicted of 4 murders and multiple sexual offenses. On 25 November 2016, the presiding judge handed down a whole life sentence, ruling that Port would spend the rest of his days behind bars. The courtroom finally gave voice to the grief and righteous anger of the victims' families. Cheers erupted when Port's punishment was announced, and relatives clung to each other as Jack Taylor's mother declared that their sick, twisted scumbag would never hurt anyone again. The final message is a call to conscience. We must not turn away from the horror of these crimes or accept excuses. Instead, we must remember Anthony, Gabriel, Daniel, and Jack by forging a safer, more just society for all.